humans came from a land bridge that connected.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
From-
You're up
from
there. You're up there in Alaska.
Right.
And you've got what are now the Bering Straits between Alaska and Siberia.
Right.
But those were not oceanic straits during the Ice Age. They were a land bridge. Why? Because sea level was 400 feet lower during the Ice Age than it is today. Why was sea level 400 feet lower? Because a huge amount of water had been taken out of the world oceans and had fallen on frozen areas and had turned into ice. North American ice cap was up to 3 kilometers deep at that point. Naturally, sea level was lower. All that water wasn't in the sea, it was on the ice caps.
And you have the weight of the ice caps pushing the Earth down and creating creating a bulge at the equator that would make things even higher.
This is the phenomenon called isostasy, that when you have an incredibly weighty thing sitting on top of one part of a landmass, it's going to push up other parts that are connected with it.
Right, right.
We can see that in Britain right now with the Isle of Wight. Because there was an ice cap on northern Scotland, the Isle of Wight in the English Channel was pushed up. But now the ice cap's gone from northern Scotland, the Isle of Wight is sinking down into the English Channel. And that's not caused by sea level rise, that's caused by isostasy. And this is a phenomenon that needs to be taken account of, particularly with things like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. But to come to your point, to go back to that map, the idea was that during the Ice Age, when the Bering Straits were a land bridge, that's how people first came into America, that they migrated by land across the Bering Straits. They happened to find an ice-free corridor through that massive ice cap, and they made their way slowly down into North America, thence into Central America, thence into South America. And this was all tied to the Clovis first notion that those were the first adventurers who came into the Americas from Siberia.
So that means no people in South America either before Clovis.
Yes, that's right. That's what it means. And in fact, it's in South America that we're finding, some of the best signs of much older settlement.
Right.
And the particularly intriguing thing to me, and I go into this in the series, and I've gone into it in my book America Before, is genetic evidence that connects people who lived in New Guinea and Australia and people in the western part of the Amazon rainforest. We're looking at New Guinea and Australia as they look today. But if you were to go back to the last ice age, you would find that New Guinea, that's New Guinea sitting on top of Australia there. That was actually joined to Australia during the last ice age.
Sure. But all of this would have been above water as well, right?
Some parts would have been. Some parts of the Pacific Ocean that are underwater now would have been above water. And islands in the Pacific Ocean that may be quite small now would have been much larger during the ice age. That's why the Easter Island tradition of a lost land called Hiva, which we go into in season 2, is particularly interesting because they talk about an island landmass in the Pacific from which extraordinary people came, which had been submerged by a sudden flood, and that actually happened in the Pacific. It happened a lot, and the supposed myth of a lost large island in the Pacific is by no means impossible during the Ice Age. It makes perfect sense. So the fact is that we have a genetic signal that connects people from Australasia, from Papua New Guinea, from Taiwan, from Australia itself, Aboriginal people, with certain tribes in South America, but we don't find that signal anywhere in North America. Suggests to me very strongly that they made a crossing of the Pacific during the Ice Age.
I think it's very highly likely that you're absolutely right. And I want to just show you this on Google Earth. And when you look out at Easter Island, which is right there, and you take a scroll to the right and you see all of these other islands, which if sea level was 400, not islands, they're underwater, but if sea level was 400 feet lower and you did have that extra weight on the ice caps, it'd be very easy to navigate all of this islands. It's like a little hockey stick that goes right to Peru, into the Amazon.
Absolutely.
And now we're seeing all this DNA evidence that all of these people over here, their DNA from Australia, Papua New Guinea, is in South America. So, I mean, doesn't that say that we had during the Ice Age, at some point in the last 300,000 years that humans have been on this planet, that they could have made it from that, from there
very,
to there?
very strongly suggests that. And there are intriguing connections, cultural connections between South America and Easter Island, which one of the first people to propose that was the late, great Thor Heyerdahl, who I had the privilege of knowing, who did the Kon-Tiki expedition, who did the Ra expedition, proved that the ancients could have been seafarers on a dramatic scale. He saw connections between cultural manifestations, the way certain stones are cut, for example, in South America and Easter Island.
Right.
And he was ridiculed by the archaeological community at that time, but actually now new DNA evidence has emerged, which shows that there is in fact a DNA connection between the peoples of South America and the peoples of Easter Island. Again and again, ideas that were once ridiculed are turning out to be true. And you're right, that ridge of now submerged land masses is particularly interesting, and it would have made the challenge of crossing between Easter Island and South America much less challenging. But I have to say that to find Easter Island at all is a challenge. It's not something you could really do by accident. If you're going to settle an island, you have to come with a population that is large enough to sustain itself, that will not go extinct. And what you're first going to do is you're going to undertake explorations with relatively few people. And then if you find something interesting, you're going to go back where you came from and bring more people with you. And that's what I think we're looking at in the case of Easter Island. And that's the story of Easter Island. They talk about survivors of the lost land of Hiva. They knew their island was going to be submerged. They had seen signs of this. They knew it was happening. They had to find somewhere else to go. And they sent out explorers all over the world to find lands. And one of the lands they found was Easter Island. They returned to Hiva before the cataclysm. They had advanced knowledge of this. And then a proper expedition was mounted and Easter Island was populated.
Right. Ryan, can you pull up the images of the walls that we have on Easter Island and the walls that we have in Peru? I mean, it's just fascinating, the similarities that you see between.
It really is,
and which could have only, that's Easter Island on the bottom right, which I didn't know that it existed, but I mean, you're looking at essentially the exact same stonework.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
You are. The same way of, and first of all, that particular ahu, as it's called, ahu vinapu, is different. Ahu is the word they use on Easter Island for the platforms on which the great moai, the statues, are positioned. I think that many of the moais and I think that the platforms, the ahus on which they're placed, have actually been, the moai have been replaced on restructured, rebuilt platforms. And those platforms are often of very poor quality, and yet they are used to date the moai. But there are a few of them. And Vinapu is one of them, which are made of basalt and beautifully cut, beautifully precision placing of them in exactly the same way that we find the precision placing of blocks in polygonal patterns at a place like Sacsayhuaman. And I think what we're seeing at Ahu Vinapu is one of the original ahus that go back to the first settlement of Easter Island, which I suggest was during the Ice Age. We know that Easter Island was massively settled later by Polynesians, and all the inhabitants of Easter Island today are fundamentally of Polynesian heritage. But I'm suggesting that there was an earlier episode of settlement as well, and that Ahu Vinapu is an example of that. It's completely different from the other platforms on Easter Island. The stonework is stunningly similar to the stonework of Sacsayhuaman, and there it sits, requiring explanation and actually completely undateable by any known means.
Right. So, I mean, that is compelling evidence.
I think so.
I mean, it's super compelling
I think so, but it's heresy
of course,
to suggest such a thing.
If you're a believer, then it's heresy. Absolutely. But if you're open-minded, it's super compelling.
It attracts the curiosity. We start to wonder, well, why are there so many supposedly coincidental similarities between cultures all around the world, when those cultures may have been separated not only by thousands of miles, but also in some cases by thousands of years?
Right.
Why do the same ideas keep on cropping up? And it's not enough, for me at any rate, to say that, oh, this is just what human beings naturally come up with everywhere. The similarities are too close, they're too precise, they're too detailed.
Right.
Again, I suggest that the best explanation for those similarities, whether it's in spiritual systems or in the way that monuments are constructed, that those similarities, what we're looking at is a legacy of ideas that has been passed down from very remote prehistory.